Hi, this is Spirit in the Shed, and I'm Chris,
And I'm Mercy.
your one-stop shop for scriptural stability that leads to spiritual sensibility. Now, when we last left off, well, I'm sure
It was
you know.
pretty bleak.
Oh yeah. So, Adam and Eve, they had paradise, they had everything, and they blew it.
They did blow it a little bit. And toward the end there, where when God kicked them out of the garden, one of the things that he said to Eve, your desire will be for your husband. And I thought that was really interesting because now her desire was no longer just for God anymore. Now she was going to have a divided heart. And the thing that it reminded me of was up in Second Corinthians where Paul is talking to his many young Padawan learners that he had under him. And he said, if you can stay single, stay single. And I really think that's why, because then you're not trying to go back and forth between I really love God and I really love my spouse and I really love God and I really love my spouse. Your focus is in one place. And when the fall happened, that's when it changed.
Yeah, I mean, it changed almost automatically. Adam knew Eve in the next sentence, and he bore Cain, and then bore Abel. So, what happened when Cain and Abel grew up?
Well, Cain was raised to be a farmer because God said, you're going to till the ground. It's going to be hard work, and I hate it for you, but consequences. Then Abel was a shepherd. So we've got one that watches flocks and one that's tilling the ground. Now, when they grew up and got older, it turned out to not be such a great story. Or it gets really exciting, depends on your perspective.
Depends on which brother you relate to the most.
It depends on which brother you root for. So one day, Cain and Abel brought their sacrifices before the Lord. They brought them together. And Abel's was taken and Cain's was not. So Cain,
He got really angry, not at God.
nope.
He got angry at Abel.
And how many times do we do that when we see somebody else succeed, even if it's spiritually, and we get jealous? Because that's really why he was mad. Anger is a secondary emotion anyway. You always feel something before you feel mad. And his, in this case, was jealousy. Because Abel's was taken and Cain's was not. And why is that?
Well, I've often really struggled with this, and I have a feeling a lot of other people struggle with this as well. And I had to come to realize you have to consider what the sacrifice actually was.
Right.
Look at Abel's, the firstborn of his flock. Something he probably loved his entire life. Raised it probably as from a baby.
Right.
Because of his love and desire for mercy from the Lord, killed his favorite thing that he loved more than anything in this world. Probably. I'm just guessing here, but I'm willing to bet that this was something he desired more than anything in this world.
Right. Well,
and then you look at Cables.
You're right.
Cables.
Let's get Cable. Coming up on Cable next, the story of Cain and Abel.
You look at Cain's gift and putting it next to Abel's. I'm getting a sense that Abel was getting it and Cain was not. And in Hosea 6:6, it says that God desires mercy, not sacrifice.
Yep.
Which seems contrary to everything else that was going on. All the sacrifices they were doing. And it points out a purpose, the reason for the sacrifice, exactly. To obtain mercy.
Right. Because in that moment, from the time of the first sin of their parents, and now here's Cain having to deal with his own frustration. Well, God sought him and said, why are you so upset? Why are you so upset? Because I took Abel's sacrifice and not yours?
Don't you know that if you do good, you'll be counted as righteous? But if you don't do good, sin is at the door, crouching like a lion.
Right.
desire is over you, but you can rule over it.
You can rule over it. Exactly. He tried to console Cain. Can you imagine if God came down and consoled you personally? Can you imagine? I mean, I'd freak out for one thing, but then I can't imagine the unbelievable. Well, I assume that I would have peace because I can't imagine being in the presence of God like right here, face to face. And he's telling me, I know it's frustrating, and here's the situation. This is what he did, and this is what you did. You can learn from it. But instead of choosing to learn from it, Cain went out and he killed his brother. But the great thing is, we don't have to stay in sin.
We don't have to stay in sin. And that's because, a lot of times the Bible makes a reference to sin, and we often think it's what we do that's sin. But it's not even what we are, but rather something we have.
It's definitely not what we are.
It's not what we are. It's what we have.
Right. Because of sin, we're dead. So, what can bring us back to life?
Only God can.
Only God.
Remember,
and He provided for that.
Remember, at the beginning, it was His breath that brought us to life.
Exactly.
In the first place.
Exactly.
He can do it again.
He can do it again. So, sin is wanting to control you. It's exactly what he told Cain. Look, it's wanting to control you, but now, this is the thing. When we talk about B-U-T, the conjunction, the word but, we're talking about a word that can negate everything right before it. Think about what God said right before he said that. Sin is wanting to control you. Sin wants to control you. It wants to control us to this day. But
God's butt.
God's butt.
One of many of God's butts that will come across here.
You have the ability. You have the ability to rule over it. And I think he says that to us to this day. It wants to control you, but you have the ability to rule over it. What gives us that ability? Back in the Old Testament, a lot of what they did was done by sacrifice. They messed up, they sacrificed. They came to a certain day of the week, they sacrificed. They stepped over a crack backwards, they sacrificed. I mean, there were a lot of sacrifices that had to be made. So, to this day, back then, we had to do all these sacrifices. And I just want to give a spoiler alert for the way things work. That we're going to meet a character in the New Testament. And his name is Jesus. And he is the way that we don't have to live in death anymore. He's the only way. So we don't have to be in death through sin anymore. So I had to throw that spoiler alert out there because the story of Cain and Abel is a pretty bleak story. And it's pretty short. But I had to give the reason that God tells us to this day that sin is wanting to control us, but we have the ability to rule over it because of Jesus.
It's actually why we don't need sacrifice anymore, because the purpose was not the sacrifice.
Right.
It was to obtain mercy.
Mercy. That's exactly right. And so through Jesus,
we have
is what we have mercy to this day. So, it's a very short story. It's a very, very short story, which is probably going to make for a very, very short episode. But we don't want to overwhelm people and run a bunch of stuff all together. So we actually just want to stick to one story at a time is what we're trying to do here with this podcast. So some episodes will probably be shorter than others, and I'm sure people won't mind. I always enjoy it when class gets out early.
Yep, and you get this, after Cain was punished, you get this strong lineage that comes after it.
The lineage in chapter 5.
Not only that, but in chapter 4 as well. You get that in the
true.
second half of chapter 4. And I think it's important to note the ending of chapter 4, when we get to this man named Lamech, and it's really short, like one verse.
Right.
But it talks about him, and it says that he went out and killed a man, and that if Cain is avenged 7 times, I will be avenged 77 times.
Yes, because Cain freaked out, and he was like, "What am I going to do, God? You're banishing me from this area." First, Adam and Eve got banished from the garden.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then Cain killed his brother Abel, and then he got banished from where they were. And he was like, "Well, what am I going to do? People are going to know that I've killed my brother, and they're going to want to kill me, and it's going to be horrible." And God said, "Don't freak out." That's my paraphrase, of course. It's not in the Bible. Don't freak out. I'll put a mark on you so that if anybody tries to harm you, they will be punished 7 times worse than what they do to you. And so that's where Lamech gets this. Well, if Cain's going to be punished, whoever hurts Cain is going to be punished 7 times worse than
whoever kills me is going to be punished 77 times.
Right.
And we get this sense from this story alone how bad things have gotten. There's a man no longer ashamed,
right,
for doing evil.
Boy, that's a really good point, Chris.
He's bragging about how evil he is.
And how he'll be protected.
Mm-hmm.
So it sets us up. And, something interesting that you've mentioned to me before is anytime there's a lineage or a certain order to the way things are, wherever that order stops is where the focus is going to be for the next lineup.
Bet you can't guess where this lineage stops.
Noah.
And that's where we're going to leave off here. And like I said, it's going to be a short episode. I hope you're excited about the next episode as I am.
Because it's probably going to be a little bit longer.
Just a bit. I'm Chris.
And I'm Marcy.
And this is Spirit in the Shed. Have a nice day, everyone.